Food preparation, you actually write, you talk about food preparation being important too. Do you want to give a little word on that?
Well, I think it has somewhat to do with belief systems too. I mean, some people are very, very particular about the purity of their food and so on.
Yes.
And I think the purity of the food is important, at least at the level that we're tuning into with our awareness, what our body is telling us we need. But generally, if you're over seasoning food or if you're cooking it too much, you're just taking away from the natural nutrition that's there. So I think the favoring would just be light and nutritious, and that goes right into the cooking as well.
Right. Let's have a little word. We'll talk a little bit about hallucinogenic drugs and being on a spiritual path. Is it the right thing to do, or should you abstain?
That's an interesting question because there are many, many people who find their first quote-unquote spiritual experience with some sort of a hallucinogen.
Yeah, like Ram Dass.
That certainly applies to my generation coming up through the 1960s, and early 70s. And it's happening today.
Yes.
Many people that come into AYP, I won't say, it's certainly not a large number. It's not half, it's not a quarter, but maybe, 5 or 10% coming in off of hallucinogenic type experiences. And they're saying, well, this is, my path, and this is my spiritual path that I'm on, and now what can you do for me in yoga? And it nearly always boils down to one thing, that hallucinogenics may or may not be an entree into the spiritual path for people, just as any kind of life-altering experience can be.
Yes.
But once you get into doing practices like meditation and spinal breathing and the purification and opening that we're talking about as being at the core of the whole process of yoga, then anything you're putting in your body, such as a hallucinogenic drug, will really begin to work against that process, because it's creating a condition in your neurobiology where you have a temporary experience, and then that experience ends, and what you're left with is the chemical in your body that has to be eliminated. So drugs don't really represent a progressive path of purification and opening. They can represent an inspiration, no doubt, just as any life-altering experience can. It can be a sickness, or it can be an accident, or the loss of a loved one, or finding a loved one. All of these things that represent what might seem to be a paradigm shift in our life can stimulate that inspiration to go and seek spiritual practices. But once you get there, then it's a whole different thing. It's about purification and opening. It's not about dwelling on the thing that got you there, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
And this is what most people experience. It's not an intellectual decision, even though I'm explaining it intellectually. People feel this. They meditate and they say, well, I don't need to smoke that marijuana anymore, Meditation is it brings me a better experience that doesn't go away, whereas the marijuana kind of drags me back into something else, and I'm not as clear as I really should be for proceeding with meditation. So it's an experience. It's listening to the body again.
Yeah, absolutely, and seeing how it's affecting your practice.
Yeah, so I don't recommend people go and try hallucinogens to get into yoga, but it happens.
Yeah.
It happens.
So do you think this is a good time to go into the Shatkarmas?
Sure.
Okay, so there are 9 for men and 10 for women, gates, that are being cleansed.
Yes. The The 9 gates is the sort of the traditional yogic description of the human body. The 10th gate I added on.
Well, it definitely,
because women obviously have some difference
yes,
in their physiology. But we really are addressing primarily the alimentary canal and the breathing and sinuses, those passages. So everything from the nose down to the anus,
yes,
and in the mouth, of course. That's really what we're talking about with the physical Shatkarmas. You know, there are several other Shatkarmas that are somewhat a different classification, but we cover really 3 main ones in the book. You know, obviously we have our normal oral hygiene of brushing our teeth and, you know, flossing and tongue scraping is covered in the book, which is actually a very important practice because most of the impurities in the mouth gather on the tongue. So tongue scraping is very important. But then from there we go into what we call neti, jala neti, which is the nasal wash, which has actually become quite popular in the West.
Yes, it has.
Over the years.
Yes, you can actually find neti pots all over the place.
Yes, so we talk about the nasal wash and several versions of it. You can use a neti pot, which you can buy at any pharmacy these days, where you run slightly salted water in one nostril and then through the nasal pharynx and then back out the other nostril. It just automatically happens. And then it's also possible and actually quite easy to do it just by putting your nose right in a bowl of slightly salted water and drawing it up.
Now, that one sounds a little more difficult to me. I don't know if it actually is. I haven't tried that one, but it does sound a little scary.
It seems that it would be, but it's actually quite easy. And I think the key in that is really the salt content, because if the water is comfortable going through the nasal passages and the sinuses, which are all very sensitive areas, if it's comfortable, then the actual physical mechanics of drawing water up through the nasal passages and then having it come into the mouth is very simple. And you know, I've been doing it for over 20 years, and I've never drowned myself or ended up, drawing it down the wrong pipe, as they say.
Yes.
It automatically, if your face is horizontal to the counter and the bowl, the water will automatically fall into your mouth before it goes any further downwards. So you basically draw it up and spit it out, and that's it. Very simple. And you can pull a lot more water through the nasal passages that way than you can with a lot quicker than you can with a neti pot.
Is there an advantage to it other than time?
Time and more cleansing.
Because
definitely more cleansing.
Can't the neti pot do it?
The neti pot can do it, but you might have to run 3 or 4, of those little pots full of water through your nasal passages. Because what you're doing with the bowl is you might be drawing, a pint or a quart.
Wow.
As much as you want. And whereas with a neti pot, it's just a very small, less than a cup even at a time, right?
Yeah, and how often do you advise this to be done?
Well, that depends. That depends on where you are in your path. Now, for spiritual reasons, as I mentioned, it's really a middle stage practice where you've been getting into meditation, spinal breathing, your mudras and bandhas, which we talked about a couple of interviews ago, where you're beginning to get that energy moving in the neurobiology. And the nasal passages and sinuses are a very sensitive area for that to occur. So middle stage, when Kundalini is beginning to become active and you're feeling, the need, it can be a daily practice for sure. Now, there are people who use nasal wash every day simply for health, for allergies or just, for keeping the passages clear. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a very safe practice. It's not something that you can do any harm to yourself with.
Yes.
So spiritually, we look at it a little differently. It just depends whether you're in it for health or in it for spiritual reasons.